In 2019, a company called The We Company was preparing for the largest IPO in American history. It was valued at $47 billion. It had offices in 111 cities across 29 countries. Millions of people believed in it. Investors were lining up. Banks were writing checks. And the man at the center of it all, Adam Neumann, was being called the next Steve Jobs. Then, in the space of 6 weeks, it all collapsed. Not slowly, not quietly, all at once. The IPO was pulled. The valuation evaporated. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. And the man who built the whole thing walked away with nearly $1.7 billion in his pocket. This is the story of Wework. But more than that, it's the story of how one man convinced some of the smartest investors in the world to believe in something that was never real, and how he almost got away with it. To understand what happened, you have to understand what Wework actually was. Because here's the part nobody talks about. Wework was not a technology company. It never was. It was a real estate company. It signed long-term leases on office buildings, broke them up into smaller spaces, and rented those spaces to startups and freelancers on short-term contracts. That's it. That's the whole business. You don't need an algorithm to do that. You don't need machine learning. You don't need to disrupt anything. It's called subletting. It has existed for centuries. And yet, in 2019, this company was worth more than Boeing, Ford, and Marriott combined. How does that happen? How do you take a real estate company, an industry with razor-thin margins, cyclical downturns, and no moat, and convince the world it's worth $47 billion? The answer is one man, one story, and a decade of carefully constructed illusion. Adam Neumann was born in Israel in 1979. He grew up partly on a kibbutz, a communal settlement built on the idea that shared space creates shared purpose. That idea would follow him for the rest of his life. He moved to New York in 2001 with almost nothing. He tried selling baby knee pads. He tried a collapsible women's heel. Neither worked. Then, in 2008, in the middle of the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, he had an idea. Office space was cheap. The city was full of empty buildings, and a new generation of workers, freelancers, entrepreneurs, small startups, needed flexibility. They couldn't sign 5-year leases. They needed somewhere to work without the commitment. So Adam Neumann and his partner Miguel McKelvey launched Green Desk, a co-working space in Brooklyn built on recycled materials. It worked. They sold it, took the profits, and in 2010 launched Wework. The first location opened in Soho, Manhattan. It was beautiful. Exposed brick, custom furniture, craft beer on tap. It felt different from any office anyone had ever worked in. It felt alive. People loved it. Wework grew fast, then faster. By 2014, the company was valued at $1.5 billion. By 2015, $10 billion. By 2017, $20 billion. And Adam Neumann had become the prophet of a new way of working. But along the way, something happened. The story Adam was telling started to drift away from the company he was actually running. Adam Neumann was not a traditional CEO. He was something more powerful than that. He was a storyteller. In pitch meetings, in keynotes, in interviews, Adam didn't talk about lease structures or occupancy rates or net operating income. He talked about energy, about consciousness, about the elevation of the world's awareness. He said Wework's mission was to elevate the world's consciousness. He said the company's valuation was not a lot of money. He said he wanted Wework to become the world's first trillion-dollar company, and then he wanted to become president of the world. These were not jokes. He believed them. And here's the terrifying part. So did the people writing the checks. In 2017, SoftBank's Masayoshi Son, the man behind the $100 billion Vision Fund, the largest technology investment vehicle in history, met with Adam Neumann for 12 minutes. 12 minutes. And he committed to investing in $4.4 billion. Son later described his thinking this way. He preferred a crazy guy over a smart guy. He said that crazy founders create crazy outcomes. That was his entire thesis. SoftBank's investment didn't just fund Wework's expansion. It transformed Adam Neumann's status. Suddenly, a company that had been burning through cash, losing more money every time it opened a new office, was being treated as a visionary technology platform. And the more money flowed in, the more Adam spent. He leased a $60 million private jet for the company. He bought properties in the Hamptons, in Manhattan, in the Bay Area. He reportedly smoked marijuana on that jet during a flight to Israel. He introduced a no-meat policy in the office, and then expensed the surf and turf dinner he had with his executive team the same week. The culture inside Wework became, by many accounts, something between a startup and a cult. Alcohol was everywhere. Alcohol was at recruiting events, at all-hands meetings, at the summer camp Wework threw for its employees every year. A festival called Wework Summer Camp, where thousands of people gathered in the woods while Adam spoke from a stage about changing the world. Employees were told they weren't just renting desks. They were on a mission. They were part of something larger than themselves. Some of them believed it so deeply, they didn't notice what was happening to the company's finances. Here is what the numbers actually showed. In 2018, Wework generated $1.8 billion in revenue. It also lost $1.9 billion. That means Wework lost more money than it made. For every dollar that came in, more than a dollar went out the door. This is not unusual for a high-growth startup. Amazon lost money for years. So did Uber. So did Netflix. But here's the difference. Those companies had a plausible path to profitability. As they scaled, their costs would fall. The unit economics improved the larger they got. Wework's unit economics got worse the larger it got, because every new Wework location required a new long-term lease, sometimes 15 or 20 years long, in the most expensive real estate markets in the world. Wework was obligated to pay those leases whether or not the desks were filled, and if a recession hit, if startups stopped hiring, if freelancers tightened their belts, those obligations didn't disappear. By 2019, Wework had committed to paying $47 billion in future lease payments. That number is not a typo. $47 billion, owed to landlords, over the coming decades. And Wework had, at that moment, approximately $2.5 billion in cash. To put that simply, the company owed 19 times more than it had. This wasn't a startup burning through its runway. This was a structural crisis hiding inside a beautiful story. But Adam Neumann had one more move. He was going to take Wework public. In August of 2019, Wework filed its S-1 prospectus with the Securities and Exchange Commission. An S-1 is the document a company releases before going public. It's supposed to show investors exactly what they're buying. The financials, the risks, the business model. Wework's S-1 was 350 pages long, and it was, by almost every measure, extraordinary, but not in the way Wework intended. The document revealed, in clinical detail, everything the investors on the inside had been willing to overlook. It revealed that Adam Neumann had trademarked the word "we," and then sold that trademark to Wework for $5.9 million. His own company. He sold his own company a word he owned. It revealed that Neumann had personally borrowed money from Wework, used company stock as collateral, and then spent some of those funds on personal real estate. It revealed that Wework's board had almost no independent members, that Neumann had 20 votes per share compared to regular shareholders, that he had the power to choose his own successor if he died, and that the successor could be his wife, Rebecca. It revealed the losses, the lease obligations, the debt. And for the first time, the people who hadn't been inside the room, the public investors, the analysts, the journalists, could see everything at once. The reaction was immediate. Financial journalists tore the document apart. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg. One analyst called Wework the most ridiculous IPO of 2019. Another said the company had invented an entirely new category of financial metrics to hide how bad the numbers were. Wework had been using a term called community-adjusted EBITDA, a made-up metric that excluded so many costs that it made the losses look like profits. That's not accounting. That's fiction. The $47 billion valuation collapsed in real time. In September 2019, Wework was forced to lower its target to $20 billion, then $15 billion, then $10 billion. Then the IPO was pulled entirely. Here is where the story takes its most astonishing turn. As Wework collapsed, the company was running out of money. It had weeks of cash left. Without an emergency bailout, it would go bankrupt, and thousands of employees would lose everything. SoftBank stepped in. They agreed to provide a rescue package worth approximately $9.5 billion, but the deal came with a condition. Adam Neumann had to leave. He agreed, and here is what he walked away with. $185 million in consulting fees, $500 million to repay loans he had taken against his Wework shares, the right to sell $1 billion of his Wework stock back to SoftBank, at a price far higher than the market value. In total, approximately $1.7 billion. The man who ran a company into the ground. The man whose recklessness and self-dealing accelerated the collapse. The man under whose leadership thousands of employees were laid off in the weeks after the IPO was pulled. He walked away with $1.7 billion. The employees who lost their jobs received, in many cases, nothing. Some of them had turned down other job offers to stay at Wework. Some of them had been at the company for years. They had believed in the mission. They had worked nights and weekends and summers in the woods, chanting the company's name. And when it fell apart, they got a gift bag. That's not a metaphor. Wework reportedly gave laid-off employees a tote bag and a bottle of tequila. The collapse of Wework sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley and the broader investment world. SoftBank's Vision Fund, the vehicle that had poured billions into Wework, reported losses of $8.9 billion in a single quarter in 2019. It was, at the time, one of the largest quarterly losses in Japanese corporate history. Masayoshi Son, who had once described his method as betting on crazy founders, publicly admitted that his investment in Wework was foolish. He stood in front of his board and apologized. Beyond SoftBank, the fallout changed how people thought about startup valuations entirely. For years, a generation of investors had accepted a simple bargain. If a company had a great story and a charismatic founder, the numbers could come later. Growth was everything. Losses were acceptable. Profitability was a detail. Wework broke that bargain open. It forced investors, journalists, and regulators to ask, how many other companies are built on the same foundation? How many other $10 billion, $20 billion, $50 billion valuations are held together by a story instead of a business? The answer, it turned out, was more than anyone wanted to admit. In 2021, the SEC began investigating Wework's IPO process. Federal prosecutors examined whether investors had been misled. Adam Neumann personally faced scrutiny, though as of this documentary's production, he has not faced criminal charges. The company eventually went public via SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company, in 2021, at a valuation of approximately $9 billion, a shadow of the $47 billion it once claimed. By 2023, Wework was in bankruptcy. The offices were still there, the beer was still cold, the exposed brick was still beautiful, but the story was over. It's easy to look at the Wework story and point at Adam Neumann, and he deserves that scrutiny. The self-dealing was real. The recklessness was real. The cult of personality that insulated him from accountability was real. But Adam Neumann didn't do this alone. He needed a system that allowed it to happen. He needed investors who valued charisma over due diligence. He needed a board that gave him unchecked power. He needed a financial press that repeated his narrative instead of interrogating it. He needed a culture, in Silicon Valley and beyond, that treated the ability to tell a story as equivalent to the ability to build a business. That culture didn't come from nowhere. It was built slowly over decades by a series of genuine successes, by Amazon and Apple and Google and Facebook, that really did begin as improbable ideas and turn into world-changing companies. Those successes created a template, the visionary founder, the impossible dream, the years of losses before the moment of triumph. Adam Neumann understood that template better than almost anyone. He didn't build a company. He built a character, and then he stepped into it. The tragedy isn't that people believed him. People had good reason to believe that ambitious, unconventional founders could change the world. The tragedy is that nobody asked the right questions early enough. Not the investors, not the board, not the banks underwriting the IPO, not the journalists covering the rise. Nobody stopped and asked, is this actually a real business? Adam Neumann today is not in prison. He is not broke. He did not disappear into quiet obscurity. In 2022, less than 3 years after Wework's collapse, he raised $350 million from Andreessen Horowitz, one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in the world, for a new real estate company called Flow. The pitch: a reimagined residential living community built around connection and shared purpose. Sound familiar? The investors said yes, because here is the most uncomfortable truth the Wework story leaves us with. We don't just want to believe in great founders. We need to believe in them. The entire architecture of modern capitalism, venture capital, growth investing, technology, IPOs, is built on the premise that the next billion-dollar idea is out there, and the person pitching it might be standing right in front of you. And that need, that hunger, that genuine hope for something extraordinary, that is what people like Adam Neumann exploit. Not because they're evil, but because the system rewards it. Wework at its peak employed 14,000 people. It housed hundreds of thousands of workers. It shaped the way an entire generation thought about where and how they worked. That's not nothing. But it was built on a foundation that was never strong enough to hold it. And one day, as it always does, the weight came down. This has been the story of Adam Neumann and Wework. And somewhere right now, there is another story being written. Another founder, another vision, another number that doesn't quite add up. The question is whether anyone will ask before it's too late.